programs. In addition to this special program today, we had a wonderful program yesterday evening with His Holiness Radhanath Swami, and we're looking forward to one tomorrow with this really wonderful musician, artist, Genevieve Harrison, which will talk about kind of the poetry of ecology. And you can learn more about these events and register for them at this address. I'll put this in the chat box for you, tinyurl.com/ecobhakti, if you want to sign up, especially for tomorrow's event with Genevieve, if you haven't already. So we are presenting a special series of gatherings this weekend on the concept of eco-bhakti. So what is eco-bhakti and why is this important now? So we want to share a little introduction about that. Eco-bhakti is a spiritual orientation, acknowledging that service to the divine includes service to earth. It means caring for other people and the earth as the beloved creation of God. During this particular time when the violence of racism and capitalism are at an all-time high, eco-bhakti might be understood as an act of resistance. This week, a 170,000 acre wildfire is burning part of Rocky Mountain National Park in Colorado. Record-breaking flooding in Vietnam has killed 114 people this month alone. 30% of Bangladesh's landmass is underwater last month due to record-breaking typhoons, washing away homes and livelihoods and killing 54 people. Severe drought in Eastern Africa has left 3 entire countries on the edge of a declaration of famine. So we are in a time of great crisis and catastrophe. How do we respond to this? Through this practice of bhakti in an ecological key, eco-bhakti. Bhakti yoga, the yoga of devotion, invites us into a loving relationship with the divine that transforms our lives, turning us into instruments of divine compassion in the world. It invites us to pay special attention to earth and to all vulnerable people and creatures. During this time of climate crisis and societal crisis, approaching our service with bhakti in the mood of bhakti may offer a pathway to reshaping our society for the better. So I'd like to introduce our speaker and my dear co-host Allegra. Our speaker this evening, our dear guest, Ranchor Prime, is an English author and researcher on Hindu environmental issues and a well-regarded teacher of bhakti yoga. Ranchor is an advisor on religion and conservation to the Alliance of Religions and Conservation and is co-founder of Friends of Vrindavan, an environmental charity active in Britain and India. He is best known for his books on Hinduism and ecology, including Hinduism and Ecology, this very wonderful book, The 8 Elements, which we'll be referring to today, the illustrated Bhagavad Gita. The Bhagavad Gita talks between the soul and God, the birth of Kirtan, and one of my favorite books by him, particularly Cows and the Earth. And he is a disciple of A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. And our co-host today, my dear friend Allegra Lovejoy Brood, is a graduate student in religion and ecology at Yale Divinity School and Yale School of the Environment. Raised in Brooklyn, New York, she turned to farming and conservation to rediscover the connection with earth innate to humanity. She now studies pastoral, theology, and care as ways to serve humanity during the climate crisis, while continuing to work in environmental education and sustainability consulting. Along with Gopal Leela Venkata and myself, she is a founding team member of the Sacred Ecology Forum, which we formed in 2017. And before I pass it along to Ranchor, we'll be taking questions from everyone. We're really grateful to do so. Or how we're going to do that is you can send me the questions, Chris Fici there. When you go to the chat box, you can choose to send me the message privately, send me your question privately, and then we will collect those questions for our question and answer session with Ranchor later in the program. So thank you, Ranchor, so much for being here with us, and I'll pass it along to you to begin our conversation today.
Thank you very much for having me. Now, can you hear me okay? Because my voice is quite soft, I know that, okay. Before I begin, as your pictures were coming up, I spotted a couple of old, highly regarded elders of my family, Rukmini, and I see there's 2 Rukminis here, but Rukmini from the old days and Dayananda. Lovely to have your company, and I hope you'll be patient and listen to my I was going to say waffle, but it won't be waffle, I promise you. I'm going to begin with a beautiful Vedic mantra to Mother Earth, and I'm going to accompany my voice with this tambura. So I'm going to just share the screen. Let's hope this works. Share. Okay, is that working? Yeah. I presume that's working.
Yes, it's working, Ranchor.
Good. So Prithvi is one of the names for Mother Earth. Prithvi Tvaya Drita Loka Devi Tvam Vishnuna Drita Tvam Shada Mam Nityam Avitram Chasunam. Oh Mother, you support all life. Goddess, you are maintained by Vishnu. Please maintain me always and bless this place. I repeat the mantra once more. Prithvi Tvaya Drita Loka Devi Tvam Vishnuna Drita Tvam Shada So briefly, just to speak to this mantra, what we see straight away is that the earth is a goddess. She is a person. She's a hugely powerful person, and she is one of our mothers who supports us and gives us affection and love. All the great heavenly bodies are divine beings. The sun, the moon, these are all divine beings. I believe this explicitly. When we stand in the light of the sun, I can see the sun. The sun can also see me. So similarly, as I walk and sit upon the earth, she can feel me, just as a mother feels her children. So the first line, Prithvi Tvaya Drita Loka, you support all life. Devi, O goddess, Tvam Vishnuna Drita, you are supported by Vishnu, the source of all, the great divine creator and maintainer of everything. Tvam Shanadaraya, Mam Nityam, you constantly maintain me. I may forget day to day, but you're always there. And Pavitram Chasanam Kuru, asana is the place upon which I sit. So please purify this place, not just mine, but all of us, where you are sitting. Please purify this place. So, stop share. Yeah. I wanted to, my intention is to speak to you for about 20 minutes. No, I said 15, that's right. I'll try to keep to 15. And then Allegra is going to raise some questions, and no doubt some discussion will follow. So I wanted to begin actually with a picture, which is an excerpt. It appears in my edition of Bhagavad Gita. Here we are. Share. The Bhagavad Gita can be thought of as an allegory, but the tradition is that it really did take place on a field of battle. So when myself and my artist friend, Charles, prepared the drawings, each chapter in my edition of the Gita has a drawing. We wanted, I suggested to him, I want to conceive of this battle in the midst of which, the warrior, Arjun, you can see him standing tall on his chariot. And next to him is his friend, Krishna, who has taken the role of steering the chariot. And at the beginning of the Gita, the warrior Arjuna says to Krishna, please bring my chariot into the middle of the battlefield. I want to see, before we begin, who is here. So we have conceived the two armies, the opposing armies, in the form of machines of destruction. Because it seems to me, the real battle in the present age, which we're all, like it or not, we're all part of this battle, is the war against Mother Earth. And so how, we respond to this, of course, this is the topic. How are we to respond to this war, which is raging all around us without our capacity to really, we can't stop this war. But we are nevertheless called upon, as Arjuna was, to participate somehow or another, to know, how do I relate to this? At the beginning of the Gita, he is filled with fear and confusion. He doesn't really know what to do. Myself, I feel rather the same, being faced with this present state of the world. I find it very difficult to know, how to respond. I remember when I was very young, I was 19 years old, and I became a vegetarian. And at that time, I had a friend stay for breakfast, stay overnight. And in the morning, I said, what would you like for breakfast, Mick? Would you like bacon? And he said, bacon? You don't eat bacon, do you, Richard? That's so unspiritual. And I suddenly, it just hit me because it was the right time. I was ready to hear it. And I thought immediately, thank you, Mick. From now on, I don't eat bacon or any meat. And so I became a vegetarian. And the next thought that occurred to me was, how wonderful. I've understood this. Now I'm going to tell everyone else, and they'll all become vegetarians too. And I couldn't understand it. I still, to this day, can't understand why everyone doesn't just become vegetarian. It's not such a difficult thing. In fact, it's a lovely thing to do. The food is better. So similarly, seeing the state of the world and the way, nature is despoiled, you would think that people would realize, what they're doing. Recently, I don't know if any of you have seen this, but there was a beautiful, very beautiful 1 hour feature film made by David Attenborough. I think it's called A Life on This Planet or something like that. And it's available on Netflix, I believe. I strongly recommend it. He gives such a powerful statement about what he has seen. He's now 93, what he's seen happen on the planet. And he gives some very clear, positive suggestions, 5 suggestions, how we can change. And it's not too late. So seeing that, you'd think everyone would just be lining up to say, yes, we must change and we're going to follow what this wonderful man is telling us. But of course, the reality we know, it won't really be like that. So going back to the opening of the Bhagavad Gita, there's another picture I want to show you. When Arjuna saw on both sides of the battlefield all the people he loved and cared for, he became overwhelmed. I don't want to fight in this battle. And that's the opening of the Gita. So there's a picture here, which I'm about to show you. Share. It's the next one, this one. When Arjuna saw this horrific battle that he was expected to take part in, he went into complete despair. So he threw down his bow and he fell to the ground and he rejected. He said, I can't fight in this battle. So Charles, my friend, he drew this kind of, spontaneously, intuitively. There's the bow. And I said to him, a couple of things I said to him, why have you drawn that black circle round the bow? And he said, oh, I don't know. He said, I just see, it just feels like it needs to be there. And then I later realized, with the help of another friend, he said, that is the pit of despair. And sometimes that feeling, especially I think in the current cycle of events, when one might feel this sense of helplessness and utter despair. So he's fallen to the ground, his head is down, and his arm is extended in rejection. On his back is his shield and his arrows in the quiver, and he's rejecting. So the second thing I said to Charles is, okay, now you made this black square, fair enough. But one thing I'm not really happy with is you've shown that behind him, that's Krishna in the chariot. And you've shown Krishna behind him. Whereas the story goes, Arjuna surrendered to Krishna and he begged Krishna, please help me. So why have you drawn Krishna behind him? He's turned his back on Krishna. But then I realized that when we are placed into this place of utter hopelessness and despair, for many people at that time, I lose sight of God. And what is very beautiful for me about this drawing is that Krishna is looking at him. And I know, although his face is only symbolic, but I know that his face is full of care and compassion. So even though I lose sight of the ultimate reality when I lose my hope, I lose sight of God, but God never loses sight of me. So I wanted to share those two with you. And then the next thing I want to do is just take us to, a sort of an opening passage of the Gita to contextualize this. Let's hope I can find it. Where is it? Oh gosh. Actually, forgive me because I'm not really so used to this, and it doesn't seem to be. Oh, I know. I think I know where I'm going to find it. I'm going to open. Here it is. Great, I found it. So this is the opening of, when Arjuna, when the warrior has, in great distress, seeing the state of affairs, he doesn't know what to do. he turns to Krishna and says, please tell me what I should do. And one thing I've come to understand through my own personal experience is that when things get very hard and almost insufferably difficult in life, that's the time when I'm best able to turn to you could say, a higher power and seek help. So that's what Arjuna did. And from that point of view, I don't see, by the way, the current state of affairs in the world as being I don't see it as being a mistake. I believe that there is a divine process unfolding. So Arjuna's response was, and I'm sure many of you may want to raise questions about that later, but Arjuna's response was to turn to Krishna. And the first thing, and this is what makes the Gita so amazing, the first thing Krishna has to tell him is that you are an eternal being. For you, for none of us are ever actually, we never die. And not only that, but we were never born because we are eternal beings. We have always existed. So in that verse number 12 on the left-hand page, there was never a time when I did not exist, nor you, nor all these warriors, nor will there ever be a time. So these times we're living in, they do seem, and they are, grave times, no doubt. And in the history of the world, there have been many very grave times, perhaps some much more grave than this, I don't know. But we ourselves are eternal beings. We're outside of time, actually. And so then Krishna just goes on to say on the right-hand page, just learn to tolerate. Happiness and distress come and go, just like winter and summer. You must learn to tolerate these things and not be disturbed. So the opening passages, the opening chapter or so of the Gita is speaking about this, how to find that inner peace, which is so important, for all of us, to find that inner peace. And I've come to that place in my life where, without a doubt, the most important time of my day is these early hours when I can go inwards, because I have come to realize that the external, it's real in the sense that it's God's energies, and we're going to talk about that. But it's not the ultimate reality. The ultimate reality is beyond time and space. And so I seek to spend time in that timeless, dimensionless spiritual realm. Then, I can enter on the day. So that's the first thing that the Bhagavad Gita has to teach us, that you're here on this battlefield, but first thing to remember is I don't really belong in this world at all. However, then Krishna teaches Arjuna about how to engage in this world with a spirit of detachment, not to just give up and go to the forest or into a cave. Or in my case, I built a sort of a cave in my garden. Actually, I can look out the window and see it now. I wish I'd love to show it to you, a sacred space. I could just go in there and never come out, quite happily, actually. But at this time, we're called to action. So I do believe that. Okay. now. There were other things that I had in mind, but I'm watching the time, and I see already I've used up my time more than. So I'm happy to open this up. I'll turn to Allegra, and I know she's given this a lot of thought, obviously. Allegra, how are we doing?
Thank you. I'm torn because I'm so much moved by hearing what you're sharing with us. But I think also maybe with some of the question format, we can open some of this up a little more.
Totally.
And hopefully we'll cover the things that you're already considering.
Mm.
One thing that I want to speak directly into, just reflecting directly on what you've said that, at this point in your life, you're seeing what is happening on the planet as some plan of God, or seeing God's hand in it. And I want to explore that. I feel that it's one thing to say for our own lives that when we've gone through difficulty or pain or even great loss, that we see God's hand working in our own lives, and that we see ourselves growing through that pain. Yet when we are thinking of others and the suffering that they're going through, it can feel uncomfortable to say, well, their suffering is God's plan too. It can almost feel like a way of sort of justifying the status quo. And I wonder how you think of that, how you make sense of a personal narrative versus a narrative about someone else.
Well, I see that suffering is universal. I see that the core of all our problems is not to do with what's going on in the world. It is birth, death, disease, and old age, and every one of us, from the highest to the lowest, are all confronted with that. And as we all, I'm sure you will understand, compassion can only be genuine if I also recognize it in myself. If I have a perception of my own pain and I learn to live with that in a mood of thankfulness, as that wonderful saying, whatever happens to me, actually it happens for me. And so once I start to feel that in my own life, then I can legitimately, I believe, look upon the pains of the whole world with that realization that ultimately this is for the benefit of every one of us. So I'm not saying that God is I don't know. It's a complicated, or not complicated. One doesn't want to oversimplify that when there is suffering, somehow this is the will of God. But nevertheless, everything, in my view, that happens is divinely intended. So how to see the divine purpose? It doesn't mean I'm not, feeling compassion. Anyway, we could obviously talk more about that. But,
and we certainly see that perspective in the yogic scriptures and in the Vaishnava scriptures, that everything is part of Krishna's plan, a part of God's plan, that Krishna or God is intimately present with every person and in everything that happens. Yet sometimes I think, especially those of us who are a little soft-hearted, we can wonder when we see something really unjust happening to someone, happening to a group of people. When we think about genocide, or the way, for example, indigenous communities in the Amazon are being driven off their land to make way for cattle ranches. It's absurd from any, sensitive standpoint. And how can we understand things that just seem so absurd and unjust from a yogic perspective?
Well, I will answer, I don't know if it's from a yogic perspective, but I would answer to say that, my capacity to have any influence on others' pains and troubles is limited. Let me find those within my range of influence and, be a help and a support to them. And don't waste my emotional energy worrying about things over which I have no control. Unless if I feel, okay, I can really make a difference, let me start a campaign or, I don't know, heaven forbid, become a politician or whatever, then do that. But I do find that the endless distress calls put out by people sitting in their armchairs, looking at their computers, is a total waste of time because they're not in that situation. Each of us in my daily life, I have the chance to some degree to give something, So let me do that and let me focus on what I can influence rather than forever being distracted by things over which I have no control. Yeah. That's one answer I'm giving.
You've spoken into something very important that resonates especially with me as a millennial. I think especially our, millennials, Gen Xers, younger people have been raised in a media-saturated environment. And most of our conscious lives have been in a media-saturated environment where we are just so deeply exposed to the brokenness in the world. And we're probably equally exposed to the beauty of the world, but because brokenness lands in the psyche in such a way, that has a deeper impact. And side by side with that, many of us, I think, were raised with an idea that we can address any challenge in the world, and that we also ought to address any challenge in the world. So it raises the question, I think, for many of us of how do we truly find a place? How do we identify our own path in responding to suffering, and how we navigate between responding to sort of any need that arises versus identifying what is God's plan for me?
When I was, 20, one of the things that really made me change my life was this sense that, I wanted to give something to the world. I thought actually I had been trained as an artist. So I thought, well, maybe I'll become an art teacher. That would be some way of giving something, small, but it would be an opportunity. But then I just had a very profound and deep experience of the spiritual consciousness around Krishna. And I came to see very, very vividly that if in those days, I was in my 20s, go on the street and present Krishna to people. Most people may not understand, but once in a while, somebody may. It may touch somebody. And even those who don't understand, in the passing years, I realized many people it did touch, actually. Seeing an exhibition of spirituality in that particular way, singing and dancing and what have you. So I do believe that there are simple things that all of us can do. And it's not up to me to tell each person, what it is you are equipped to do. But to find what it is I can give to the world, even if it's a very simple thing. And I know people do it all the time. They find something that is truly meaningful and they put their energy into that, rather than becoming so distressed. And you're quite right, the internet, the media in general, ever since, I guess, newspapers arrived in the 19th century, the media has been a bit of a curse. It's kind of a mixed blessing, isn't it? But mostly it's a curse because, as you rightly say, when we see others' pain, it somehow leaves a more vivid impression. And so the media proprietors, they know that. And they quite deliberately, I'm sorry, but to seem so cynical, but they quite deliberately find all the distressing things and they put those out, because that way, at the end of the day, they can make more money. It's that simple. You know, if I was in charge and there was a way to do it, I would completely ban the internet. I'm sorry, I would. It's worth recalling, you know, here where I live in England, in Somerset, Christianity arrived on these shores in, I don't know exactly, but roughly 200 AD, and spread. It spread underground because for the first 100 or so years, it was considered, you know, illegal. The Romans suppressed it, but eventually it spread. And there was one man, I think his name's Cuthbert, and he lived on a little island off the west coast of Scotland. And he and his disciple, just the two of them, they spread Christianity all over, over large parts of northwestern Europe. And all they had was their feet to walk on. And they had coracles, you know, these little round basket things to cross the ocean. So they were able to influence vast numbers of people. They didn't have printing presses even. All they had was the human voice. So we don't require, what I'm saying is, we don't require all this digital technology in order to communicate. It's really to do with the heart and the voice. Yeah. Okay.
You've written 11 books, as far as I could keep count, including this lovely book, The 8 Elements. It's part memoir, it's part reflection on ecology, and part yogic understanding of the earth. Can you tell us a little bit about this book and the experience of writing it?
Well, it's all a bit mysterious, really, for me. When I passed my 60th birthday, I went into a sort of series of inner crises. And I ended up completely emptied out, having been, you know, a very dedicated follower or practitioner of Krishna consciousness through most of my life. I found even that, everything just vanished. And I was just in the middle of a great emptiness. And at that time, I was very blessed to have some internal experiences, and I was given a very clear direction from a higher source, mystically, and it was to write a book about the 8 elements. At that time, I'd taken all the pictures off my altar. Okay. Yeah. All I had was a candle. So my response in this sort of inner conversation was, I don't know anything about the 8 elements. What could I possibly write? And I was told, simply start and the words will be given to you. So I took it very seriously. And for the next 18 months, I couldn't do anything. I was just like thinking, how am I going to do this? And then all of a sudden, my good friend who lives in the Lake District, the most beautiful part of England, he had a cottage there, and he said, my cottage is empty. We've talked about it before, because I had been there actually to write on a previous occasion. He said, it's empty, but only for the next 5 weeks. If you want, you can come and stay there and do your writing. But after 5 weeks, I'm renting it out. So that was the push which I needed, and off I went. And for me, it was a mystical journey. Each day I would sit in the morning and seek guidance. I would simply go into meditation. I would chant, and so I would sit there silently and wait to see what will come. And by the time I got to and the question was in the back of my mind, towards, the 8 elements, the first 4, you will all know: earth, water, fire, and air. And at least I knew what they were. The 5th element, which in Sanskrit is called akash. We don't really have an English word for it, but sometimes it's called ether. But sometimes it's also called space. So when I was about to write that chapter, I had not a clue. What am I going to say? But still, inspiration was given to me. But especially I was thinking, what am I going to do when I get to the final 2 elements? The ether is the 5th. Number 6 is mind. Well, I could write a book about the mind. That's the subject of yoga, how to control my mind. But what am I going to do when I come to the 8th element, the 7th element, which in Sanskrit is called buddhi, and is translated sometimes as intelligence, but it's much more than intelligence, I would say. It's a deep inner voice, which we all have access to, of intuition and inspiration. So that's going to be difficult, but the most difficult of all would be the false ego, or we could just say ego. In Sanskrit, the word ego is, there is a Sanskrit word, and it is ahamkara. Ahamkara means I do. And it's an illusion. That's what Krishna tells us in the Gita. You think you're doing all these things, you're not. And it is the foundation of the whole material existence, is this conviction that I'm doing things. And Krishna says, you're not doing anything. It's all done by nature. So how am I going to write about that? And that was the most mysterious and mystical of all the chapters. And then at the end, I was then guided to now look beyond what lies beyond the material elements. Of course, is the spirit. So look at the spirit. Anyway, it took me just, I think, 4 weeks to write it, but then I spent another year, or a year, nearly 2 years actually, revising and so on and so on.
It sounds like it was such a profound experience to go through the book. And I can imagine that during the revision process, there might have been a lot of wondering about how do I adjust this in a way that it'll reach people or touch people. What is the impact you've been hoping to have with this book?
Oh gosh, I've no idea. I thought, as many authors do, when you finish a book, now everyone's going to want to read my book. But then I realized it's not like that. I should have known that. But somebody gave me a donation just out of the blue. Here's, print your book. And she gave me enough money to print, 2,000 copies. So most of those are not sold. Maybe I should have a fire sale. But what I felt when I had finished the first draft was a friend of mine actually told me, there's not enough of you in this. And there was one passage he pointed to. See, here you talked about your own experience. And that brought it to life for me, he said. So what I then did was I went back through and I looked at all the times in my own life when this, some experience I've had has helped me to go deeper into my relationship with nature, because that's what the whole book's about. The whole book is about recognizing the divine qualities of nature. Because ultimately, the divine is in everything. every element is pervaded by God. So I don't know, actually, Allegra, who's going to read this book. I was very gratified to hear that, you read it and it made enough impression on you to then introduce it to others. And my satisfaction is just having written it, because it did have a very profound effect on me. And at the end of it, I rediscovered Krishna, but in another way, in a way I had never known, before.
It's true with so many things in life, but especially our spirituality, that sometimes it needs to come all tumbling down in order to rebuild it from the inside.
Exactly. I mean, I had been through a very, very difficult time, the most difficult time of my life, prior to writing that book.
This summer, I had the privilege of using this book in a book club, and one of the passages we spent some time with was this passage on page 31 to 32. This passage entitled "Children of the Earth." Do you think you could read that for us? We can hear it in your own voice and then hear your reflections on that passage.
Okay. How far do you want me to read?
That page and a half.
Oh, to the end of that chapter?
Yes.
Okay. Children of the earth. Long ago, our damaged relationship with the mother led to 3 pathological tendencies embedded in human culture over thousands of years. They are subjugation of women, enslavement of animals, and exploitation of nature. These 3 are symptoms of humanity's disconnection from the mother. A mother cares for her children, but if they take from her by force, her nourishment is interrupted. This is what we see in the world today. Nature's abundance is everywhere, but we are creating scarcity. We are nature's children, children of the earth. Our urgent need is to heal our relationship with nature and so restore the balance of life. This healing happens at every level of our being, beginning from earth, through all the elements that we are made of, to the subtlest life of our spirit. As wholeness manifests, our lives and the life of the world are transformed and illuminated in fullness and depth. This is the experience we are here to find in these challenging times, that will carry us to the unlimited gifts that lie ahead. The journey through nature's 8 elements deepens our connection with nature and with the love that is the basis of all life. It helps us to discover ourselves. It may not make much sense yet. The elements are understood by experiencing them, and that is what this book is about. Knowledge of the 8 elements shows how consciousness is present in all matter and how this world is made of love. We don't just have to accept this as theory. The journey through the elements demonstrates their essence is love. It is like a pilgrimage. If we follow the road with heart, it will change us. Yeah. So I think it's to do with awareness. So, for example, one of the discoveries I made, and each of us has to do this individually, although there may be things which I report, which will be, inspirational for some of you, but each of us has to go on this journey. When I was writing the first chapter, the chapter on Earth, I meditated deeply on Mother Earth, and I had a profound realization. I was contemplating, you know how you may have heard this, that, you know, when you sit, I'm sitting cross-legged now, but if you're sitting on a chair, it really helps to have your feet flat on the floor and to feel, you know, that connection. It kind of centers me. So I began thinking about that and that feeling of the connection with the earth. And it occurred to me that, of course, this is called gravity. Gravity is the force that connects us to the earth. And one of the words that, you know, we use to describe gravity is its attraction. I am feeling the attraction of, ultimately, of the mother. And so I realized it is actually the manifestation of her love holding me. So I'll go no further at this point, but that's something that can be profoundly explored, is to feel this emotional connection with Mother Earth, which pervades all of nature. Yeah. So that's some comment on that passage. That it's a journey, you know, of discovery. Yeah. And by going on that journey, all aspects of my existence start to become illuminated. Yeah. And it's not a question of, you know, the scientific analysis of the earth or the planet. It's much more to do with feeling it. And by the way, I always find it very fascinating that the Sanskrit name for earth is Bu, B-H-U, Bu. And sometimes it's also called Bhumi, and Bhumi is the name of the goddess. So I thought, how fascinating. But then I explored that a little further, and I found that in Roman times, they also believed in the goddess of the earth, and their name for her, they had temples to her, was Terra, T-E-R-R-A. And terra, of course, is the Latin word, which we all know, means earth. Not the planet, it just means the substance, the actual earth itself, that I can pick up in my hand. It's called terra. And it pervades the English language in so many ways. You'll find that word. And similarly, in different cultures, you know, the Greek name is Gaia. In different cultures, the name for Mother Earth has passed into all aspects of our daily lives in that particular language. So there is a fundamental recognition that the earth is a person. We just lost sight of it, that's all. So, yeah. Over to you.
I can say, you know, in my own practice, you know, there's a time of really intentionally redeveloping that relationship with earth, that connection with earth. And part of the same practice, both the living connection with earth and with my mother and the mothers in my family came hand in hand. It's been amazing to feel that they've really come together in that way. And I noticed that in the book, you described being held by earth, held by water, but you also, when you were discussing air, you discussed being held by air. And I was quite struck to see that. I think of air as something moving around, not as something that could support me, that could support a body or a spirit. Can you say anything about that?
Well, one of the things that occurred to me is that, you know, obviously we can't live without air, but it's interesting to just note that earth, which manifests as food, in theory, I could live maybe a month without food. Water is much more difficult. I could live maybe a week. If I don't drink water for a week, I could die. Next one is fire. Without warmth, we can't survive for very long at all. In the sea, when someone gets very cold, I think within half an hour they could die from the cold. How long can I survive without air? Just a few minutes, and I'm finished. So air is so intensely, close to us, and it pervades, in the yogic tradition of prana. Prana is the one of the names given for the breath of life passing through the body. It doesn't mean air; it's the energy that's carried by the air. And there are 5 different kinds of airs that move inside the body, carrying different forms of life energy. So it's very, very profound. And sometimes, in meditation, in mantra chanting, one can become aware of this universal connection with the ocean of air. So I came to hope in writing this book. I thought, if we somehow or another can just become more sensitive to all these different elements of nature, we're more likely not to harm her. Yeah.
You've written about wondering whether there will be a turning point in humanity's existence on Earth.
Yeah.
And it is, you're not the only one using this language. Joanna Macy uses it from a Buddhist standpoint and literary standpoint. Indigenous activists use it, and Christian mystics use it when talking about apocalypses as rebirths, painful rebirths, but rebirths nonetheless. I love to read a passage on page 101 and also use that as an opportunity to explore how 2019 and 2020 have shifted your views on our collective turning point. Maybe we can start with the passage and then go from there. This is Evolution of Human Consciousness for the page and a half.
You want me to? Shall I read?
I would love to hear it in your voice, yeah.
Okay. Humanity has been in the industrial cycle, driven by carbon-based fuels for nearly 3 centuries. During this time, human population has quintupled. The precursor of change was the misleadingly named Age of Enlightenment, which shifted human perception of nature from a relationship of reverence to one of exploitation. This shift is the inevitable outcome of a loss of sacred vision. However, it may yet have a redeeming side. I have learned in my own life that when a way of living is not working, my tendency is to push to an extreme and force a breakthrough. This is human nature, to intensify a pattern of behavior to breaking point where it collapses to make way for a new phase of evolution. When I walked into the suffocating heat at the head of Rydal Valley, I was faced with a dead end. Being human, I found a way to climb out of it, and in the process, learned something about myself and the world. This is what we seem to have been doing by pursuing the path of industrial development. We are forcing ourselves to the limit of physical exploitation of the planet's resources. In so doing, we are preparing to evolve to a deeper understanding of ourselves, a broadening of human consciousness. This opening of our perception to higher dimensions will lead us to rediscover nature as sacred teacher, to enter deeper into her mysteries. I'll just pause there because I'm saying we, this will lead us. What I have to acknowledge, it will only have this effect on those who are willing to go through that change. And not everyone is. In fact, I will have to be honest and say, it will only ever be, so far as I can tell, a minority of people who are ready to go on that journey. I'm not sure what becomes of the rest. I really don't know. But it simply is what I've learned in life, that few people are willing to go through profound transformation. So I close by saying, climate change looks as if it will be a major catalyst in our evolution. It will usher in a shift in the balance of life on Earth. We will learn new ways of relating with nature, not just in our actions, more importantly, in our consciousness, in how we understand our relationship with planet Earth. Thus, fire will bring about profound transformation in the evolution of human consciousness. I think that's what we're seeing happening even now as we speak. This is going on. But where it's going to lead, how many people can make that shift, I don't know. I don't know.
I want to give an opportunity for you to take some water as also if you need to. I know we've been speaking for a long time.
Thank you.
And I have to say, I'm also, a little speechless, just sort of absorbing, like, there's so much, the enormity of witnessing the planet and just people across the spectrum of experience. Yeah. And the space of not knowing is tremendous.
Yes, when I was younger, when I discovered the Vedic literatures, and the Bhagavad Gita and so on, I thought, this is great. It answers all my questions. And then in course of time, of course, I thought, well, my initial thought was, now I have all the answers. I've got to tell everyone the answers. I feel very differently now. I feel that, as you say, that space of not knowing is a very important experience, which we're all given in this world. But it is quite a tendency to deny that state of not knowing. I don't have an answer. It's only when I can really enter deeply into that space that I can then start to hear that lovely expression in the Bible, the still small voice, which we all have inside us. That's where the true understanding comes from. The teachers and the scriptures and the various, spiritual practices, they're there simply to guide us to that point where I find the inner source of truth. Otherwise, it's all on the surface, really, Yeah.
So much of the book, The 8 Elements, as well as your Gita, are about this process of sensitizing not the sensationalism we talked about before with the media, etc., but sensitizing ourselves to others, to the space around us, to the energies moving around us and through us. Sometimes it can feel like a fine line between becoming more sensitive and slow and quiet and intuitive in our work, and kind of just tuning out of the world and stepping back into the internal space. And of course, sometimes we do need to step back for a period of time. But how can we, be mindful of ourselves and for our loved ones about resensitizing ourselves and changing how we are in the world without tuning out or, just kind of checking out of the world?
Yeah, it's really, of course, it's about tuning in, isn't it? I take your point, tuning out. A certain amount of tuning out is a necessary thing to do. But I've come to the conclusion that it's part of the life's journey. In my youth, my tendency was to engage very much with the world, to be very busy, not always with much understanding, but to be busy. And in the process, for most of us, we might, form lasting relationships and have a family, have children, or amazing projects, and get very, very wrapped up in doing things externally. But life is so beautifully harmonized in such a way that as my capacity for the external starts to reduce, and on a parallel, my capacity for the internal starts to increase. That's how life is. So one thing I'm eternally grateful to my guru, my teacher, for is that when I was very young and in this very active stage of my life, he pretty much forced me to do a bit of inner practice. Even though sometimes it was extremely, hard. My chaotic mind wanted to keep getting up and doing stuff, but I tried, to sit down and chant my mantras and focus and so on. And of course, what he taught his disciples was to start early in the morning. So I got a lifetime habit, actually. Even when it was really against my grain in many ways, I kept trying. So I think it's a bit like, anyway, it's building a good habit, something like that. So now, physically, I just can't do as much. And if I sometimes get carried away, I just wear myself out. But what I can do is I can, as you say, tune out. And you could call it tuning out. But increasingly for me, it becomes tuning in. And the realization that the real experiences of life are actually internal experiences. There's in the chapter on mind, I described this experience I had with the full moon in the small hours. It was the real, actually, I would love to, there's just a few sentences I'd love to read. May I do that?
Please.
Yeah. It's the opening of the chapter on the mind. I had this in front of me. How am I going to, enter this subject? So this is what happened. Early this morning, the full moon blessed me when I woke to its rays streaming through my window. I dressed and walked out into the night. While the moon slipped in and out of the clouds, casting crisp shadows onto my path, I climbed the side of the fell. Halfway up its steep, rocky slope, I reached a smooth stone where I sat to contemplate the peace and solemnity of the moonlit night. Beneath me, dark and brooding fells floated in a luminous sea of mist that spread along the valley floor. I closed my eyes and counted silently the rhythmic sound of my mantra on my beads. In the distance, I heard the muffled roar of waterfalls, while inside the mantra rose and fell with my breathing and the beating of my heart. Its vibration led me deep. The silent moon spread across the landscape, while the silent vibration of sacred names spread through the landscape of my mind. So subtle and profound is the mind that it can hold within it the solid weight of hills, cold slabs of stone, soft silhouettes of trees, the distant sound of water, vaporous blankets of mist, drifting clouds beneath a silver moon, and envelop all these with the reverberating sound of mantra. As the moon illuminates the land, so my mind captures the world and holds it within. What an amazing thing is mind. Yes, so the mind is just the beginning of that inner realm. In the end, just as now, we're experiencing each other as images on a screen. So in the same way, each of us is experiencing the world as images on the inside of my screen. That's my reality. And of course, the practice of yoga, which goes deeper and deeper, it begins with the body, then it goes to the mind, then it goes to the deep-seated intuition of buddhi, and ultimately it comes to awakening to my true self, all of which is completely beyond the external world, cannot be seen, cannot be heard, cannot be understood, and yet, actually, it's there all the time. Yeah. And if I can awaken myself to my inner life, then as I move in this world, I can be truly effective. And I will straight away acknowledge I'm not at that point, but I knew someone in my life, beyond a doubt, who was completely at that place of total effectiveness in everything he did, because he was fully alive and connected internally. And as the years go by, he left. I'm speaking of my guru. He left more than 40 years ago. But as the years go by, I appreciate him more and more, and I feel him with me. Yeah.
In the space of the moral distress, if I can use that word, of being alive today and being sensitive or engaged today, there often arises a tug of war between selfishness and giving or obligation. And I think sometimes our sense of obligation to fix things, right, to fix the needs that we perceive, sometimes that sense of obligation itself can be a kind of selfishness, needing to be a fixer or needing to not see pain or experience pain.
Needing to not experience pain.
Yeah, or see pain from the outside. Sometimes we can't tolerate that. And you just spoke about being, what does it mean to truly be alive and come from within? And in this vein, there's a quote that is very dear to me by the great theologian Howard Thurman, where he says, speaking of vocation, do not ask what the world needs of you and then go try to do that. But instead ask what makes you come alive and live that way. Because what the world needs is people who have come alive.
I like that very much. I like that very much. To be true to myself. Yes. To be true to myself. That's what makes me real in the end. Yeah. I agree. And in fact, the whole journey of life is to discover myself. Because only when I know myself can I know you. How are we doing here?
We have about a space of about 10 minutes left, and we've been watching and bringing in questions that have been coming in.
Okay.
But I also know that earlier you said that there was a little bit more you were thinking to share if you had the time, and I wonder whether we've covered that or whether there's more you have waiting that you'd like to share with us.
Yes, I have one verse, mantra from the Bhagavad Gita I would really like to share with you all. In the Gita, Krishna says that, these 8 elements are, they are my energy. And then he says, for example, I am the taste in water. I am the light of the sun and moon. I am the fragrance of the earth. I am the sound in ether. I'm in all of this. So just prior to that, there is one beautiful verse. So let me just, if I may, share it with you. Yes, it's this one here. Possibly, this might be my favorite verse really from the Gita. Speaking about this capacity to see, Krishna says, me, yo mam pashyati sarvatra, which means the one who sees me, mam means me, in everything, sarvatra, everything. Sarvam cha mai pashyati, and cha is and. So and in everything, and sees everything in me. Sees me in everything and sees everything in me. God is in everything, everything is in God. And the one who sees that, tasyaham na pranashyami, that one never loses me. Socha me na pranasyati, and that one is never lost to me. So I want to point out, and we'll sing this mantra, but I want to point out that this is speaking about, this profound spiritual vision of life in a very personal way, because Krishna is saying me. He's saying, seeing me everywhere, seeing everything in me, and that one never loses me and is never lost to me. There is this sense of an interconnection, and we all have this capacity, and that's the way that we can go about seeing the divine in nature. One who sees me everywhere and sees everything never loses and is never lost to me. So in this time, this is a good time to practice this, to see God in everything, even, heaven forbid, even in the mistakes and the idiocy. Somehow or another, look beyond, beneath the surface, but also, in the beauty, in every aspect of nature. This has always been the essence of life. The Bhagavad Gita was spoken 5,000 years ago. So many great, profound teachers and literatures have been given over the thousands of years. Funnily enough, I have to say it, that we are not in such an exceptional time in terms of the confusion, in terms of the pain that many people feel. There's been many such times, probably far worse, to be honest. But what is added is two things, I feel. One is the numbers of humans, vastly more than any others in recorded history. I don't know, in previous epochs before sort of, hundreds of thousands of years ago, millions of years ago, goodness knows what was going on. But in this present epoch, the vast numbers of people intensify everything. And the other thing, well, there are two other things. One is the technology. So much damage can be done. What could you do with a bow and arrow? How much harm could you cause? But if you're, armed with some of these weapons and these machines, so much damage can be done. And on top of all that, the internet. Especially for the younger generation, I really feel for them. I have two grandchildren in there. One's 8 and the other's 10. And, they spend so much time on their little screens. And they're becoming very expert. And I just pray that God will give them a vision to see how to get through it. They will probably find a way. But many, many, many young people just get completely captured, utterly captured. So, in that sense, This is a very intense time. Yeah.
That beautiful shloka could be a beautiful place to leave us for the day. But while you were sharing it, two questions came in that are along the same lines. And I find it very interesting that during such a comforting shloka, this question about grief came in. And those often go hand in hand. From what you've shared about your own life and your journey, including through the depths of doubt and pain, I would think that maybe you've developed a deep capacity for holding grief. I just want to name and offer into this space. Yes, there is so much grief during previous world wars and terrible events, but also today, some days, feeling the species loss and extinctions around us and the loss of ecosystems and of entire nations that are having to, basically relocate, often under great duress. The grief is very, very heavy. And, this beautiful verse you just shared, I think is one response to that. But I wonder, from your own realizations, is there anything else you would like to share about holding grief?
Well, I think you put it very well. Holding grief, not running away from it, holding it, and not clinging to it either, but simply accepting this experience and going deeply into it. And there is one beautiful passage in St. John of the Cross in medieval Spain. He wrote The Dark Night of the Soul, much misused, misquoted. And in there is a passage where he describes how in a pitch dark sort of crypt in the old buildings underneath the hall is the crypt, and no light gets in. So in this pitch darkness, if, he said, there is a small chink through which a beam of sunshine enters. He said, if there's no dust in the air, you will not see it. You will only see that beam of light when it strikes a pillar. Then you will see it. Otherwise, in the pitch darkness, you won't see the light, but it doesn't mean the light isn't there. Yeah. So I think some of us have probably experienced that. That sometimes at the darkest moment is when the light can strike. Yeah. And I see the whole journey of the human family in the present times because of this amazing, connection that never existed before of the internet. It's not all bad because it's intensifying this experience. And so it is very much as a family, in one sense, that we see and experience what's going on. And this could be a time of profound realization that light can enter. But I hasten to add that only for those who are, ready, who are open. Because not everyone will be able to see the light, that's for sure.
Thank you. Thank you.
But those who do can have an immense influence without even knowing it, you know, of transformation and of growth. Yeah.
Yeah.
That can happen, and that will happen, I'm quite sure. Thank you. Have we?
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for everyone's calm presence.
Mm. Yeah, there's so much to sit with and take away for the rest of today. So thank you.
Yeah.
Krishna Kishore.
Yeah, just thank you to everyone, especially thank you, Rancher. This was just such a blessing. We really hope that you take with you from Rancher's deep words of wisdom, just this kind of blessing of expanded awareness of the sacredness of the world around you, because it's just it's the real being rooted in that sacred earthiness that is our very being is really the key towards everything we're striving for. So, Rancher, thank you so much for just the blessing of your presence and your wisdom.
Oh, the blessing has been all for me to be with all of you. Thank you so much.
And yeah, and thank you, Allegra, for wonderful questions. And thank you all for everyone for being here and being so deeply attentive. I really appreciate it. We have one more, and as we close today, just one more event in our Eco Bhakti weekend tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, an event called The Poetry of Nature with Johnny Harrison, who's a Grammy-nominated kirtan artist and a regular performer on BBC Radio, one of the most amazing artists we have in our Bhakti community. So that'll be from 1 to 2:30 p.m. tomorrow Eastern Standard Time. You can register for that at tinyurl.com /ecobhakti. Again, I'll put that in the chat box for you here. And we just want to thank all of the wonderful people who are putting this together this weekend: Princeton University Office of Religious Life, the Hindu Life Program. Thank you to the Bhakti Center. Thank you to everyone involved at the Sacred Ecology Forum. And we wish you a wonderful rest of your day, evening. And thank you so much.
Thank you. Bless you.